I so love you being here.
And I love being
I've really
here.
I've really missed you, and here you are today. Hey?
I know, I just feel so privileged to be here with you and Anton. And do you know what? What Anton's saying there is just what applies to everybody. It's something we all should do. All those different things. And here we go. Air supply.
Ngā mihi nui kia kōrua, Anton and Julia. You've been
See you, Anton.
You've been wonderful. Thank you to Sam Hollis, my wonderful producer. We're Not What I Love. We'll be back on Monday. Checkpoint is next.
Kia ora, good evening. This is Checkpoint on RNZ National. I'm Nick Truebridge. Haere nei, police reopen borehole drilling and reignite the hopes of the Pike River families. Dramatic rescues take place across Florida amid warnings Hurricane Ian could be the most deadliest in the state's history. Get your brollies out and prepare to hunker down for a wet start to the school holidays. Australia puts the pandemic behind them, scrapping mandatory isolation. We hear from a company trialling a 4-day working week. We've talked about that a little bit this week, haven't we? And he owns 2 mowers and an edge trimmer. We meet one of the country's youngest lawn mowing contractors. You can watch us live on Facebook, Freeview Channel 50 and Sky Channel 83.
RNZ News at 5. Ngā mihi o te ahi, I'm Evie Ashton. The police are returning to the Pike River mine to drill 10 new boreholes, which they hope will help them figure out what caused the fatal first explosion more than a decade ago. The November 2010 disaster resulted in the deaths of 29 miners. Samantha G has more.
The last borehole drilling investigation ended in March, but Detective Superintendent Peter Reid says the criminal investigation team needs more evidence to find out what happened. The news of further drilling came as a surprise to some families of the Pike River mine victims. Bernie Monk, who lost his son Michael in the explosion, says it's frustrating the mine was sealed before police inquiries ended. Sonia Rockhouse, whose son Ben died, welcomed the gathering of as much evidence as possible, as it could lead to a prosecution over the deaths.
A huge search and rescue effort is continuing in Florida in the aftermath of Hurricane Ian, which cut a coast-to-coast swathe of destruction across the US state. Boats and helicopters are being used to reach flood-stricken communities. Florida Governor Ron DeSantis says the damage is one of the worst-hit cities, Fort Myers, is almost indescribable. At least 17 people have been killed, more than 2.5 million homes and businesses have no electricity. A New Zealander living in Florida has weathered Hurricane Ian on a boat. Steve Roper and his partner, Sharon Nissen, live on a 75-foot boat moored at Cape Canaveral. He says the wind picked up around 4 p.m. and ramped up again 4 hours later.
Went outside and it was blowing a gale. We had to take the ladders down off the boat. We had to secure everything we could. Neighbours' boats were tying up all their boats that hadn't been tied up. And yeah, it was pretty rough last night. We didn't get any sleep.
Ian has regained hurricane strength after moving out over the Atlantic and is expected to hit South Carolina on Friday. A new children's health centre in Wellington will provide special care for families from Hawke's Bay and Taranaki to Marlborough. The unit was blessed at dawn before being formally opened by the Governor-General and Health Minister. Kirsty Frame was at Te Waunui this morning.
One of the most anticipated new features of the centre is a pull-out bed for every patient room for whānau staying the night. The building has room for 151 patients and is equipped with plenty of distractions for the tamariki, like TV screens, a playground and quiet corners. Health Minister Andrew Little says while the new space hasn't added any extra bed capacity, it will free up more space in the general hospital for other care services. The health unit will open to patients in 2 weeks.
A court has heard Gloria Vale members received almost $5 million in government funding in the 2021 financial year. Chartered accountant Gordon Hanson has been giving evidence in an employment court case brought by 6 former members of the religious community. He says the $4,820,000 in government money included working for families payments and education funding. Mr Hanson says Gloria Vale's sharing account is controlled by 3 senior men.
This account, I have been advised, is controlled by Gloria Vale and is funded almost exclusively from the working for family payments. The sharing account, per the Account Operating Authority, is controlled by Faithful Pilgrim, Stephen Steadfast and Peter Righteous.
The accounts also show Gloria Vale spent an average of $21 per person per week on food. And employers say offering a 4-day working week is now more common than ever after the Council of Trade Unions suggested a 4-day working week pilot to help the economy. New Zealanders seem to have mixed feelings about what it would look like, but Whangare's Tony Gordon, panel beaters and auto painters adopted the 4-day work week 4 years ago. Its owner, Kevin Hurley, says shorter weeks are the ultimate perk that a company can offer. Mr Hurley says if more businesses adopt the practice, companies will have happier employees and enhanced productivity. In sport, organisers of the Women's Rugby World Cup have set their sights on filling Eden Park for opening matches after confirming record-breaking sales for the tournament opener in Auckland. Sports editor Stephen Hewson has more.
Over 30,000 tickets have been sold for the opening day at the 55,000-seat venue, with the 12-nation tournament kicking off on Saturday week. The previous record at a Women's World Cup match is the 20,000 crowd sellout for the 2014 final in Paris when England beat Canada. The opening day of this year's tournament sees England play Fiji, France take on South Africa, and the defending champions, the Black Ferns, play Australia. The tournament was due to be played last year, but was postponed due to the pandemic.
And French driver Sébastien Ogier has grabbed a narrow lead after this afternoon's 5th stage of the Rally of New Zealand. Ogier in his Toyota Yaris finished over 8 seconds clear of his nearest rival on the 29-kilometre stage to grab a 1.3 second lead. Hayden Paddon, competing in the second-tier WRC2 category with his electric Hyundai, is 9th overall and the leading New Zealander. He is 3 minutes 20 seconds off the lead. Fellow New Zealander Shane van Gisbergen, who's also competing in the second-tier division in a Skoda, is 12th overall. The rally finishes on Sunday. That's the news.
Go Susie Ferguson aho in for Kim Hill this Saturday morning. Tomorrow after 8, CNN journalist Christiane Amanpour on her refusal to wear a headscarf to interview the president of Iran. Rugby star Ruby Tui's remarkable journey from troubled childhood to Olympic gold. Leilani Farha, who's working globally towards housing as a human right, and the remarkable story of the women left behind after the tragic Scott Antarctic expedition. Join me after 8 on RNZ National.
This is RNZ National on air on rnz.co.nz and on your mobile. You're with Nick Truebridge next on Checkpoint. Now the short forecast from Met Service to midnight Saturday from Northland to Taranaki, including Bay of Plenty and the Central High Country, also Gisborne, Hawke's Bay and the Waded Upper. Periods of rain or showers, heavy falls expected in Coromandel, Bay of Plenty and northern Gisborne, possibly also in Northland and Hawke's Bay north of Napier. Thunderstorms possible for Waikato, Waitomo and Western Bay of Plenty this afternoon. Whanganui and Manawatu, high cloud today, occasional rain tomorrow. From Horowhenua to Wellington, also Nelson and Marlborough, mostly cloudy with scattered rain. Canterbury, partly cloudy today with isolated light showers, fine tomorrow, apart from patchy morning drizzle north of Darfield. Otago and Southland, also Bulla, Westland and Fiordland. Generally fine, showers about Bulla, Southland and Clutha clearing this afternoon. And for Kohu, the Chatham Islands, partly cloudy, becoming fine tomorrow afternoon. It's 7 minutes past 5. Our next news headlines and traffic is at 5:20.
Thanks, Evie. Kia ora, this is Checkpoint. I'm Nick Truebridge. Hurricane Ian is viciously tearing through several US states, leaving massive destruction in its path. At least 17 people are dead and millions are without power. Now, Hurricane Ian is moving towards South Carolina and gathering strength after sweeping through Florida, leaving widespread devastation. President Joe Biden is warning of substantial loss of life and many areas will need major rebuilding. And it's on track to become the worst natural disaster in Florida's history. Here's CNN's Brian Todd.
Up and down Florida's west coast today, residents facing flooded homes, neighborhoods underwater, streets littered with abandoned cars, roofs torn off, boats wrecked, roads blocked by flooding and debris after a stormy night of tearing winds, rushing water and last-minute escapes as the Category 4 hurricane ripped through.
All of a sudden, we flooded. The house flooded. It just started going deeper and deeper, and by the time we were walking out, we were mid-thigh in water.
The Naples Fire Department carrying out water rescues, even though some of their own stations were flooded. First responders even spotted on jet skis.
We've never seen a flood event like this. We've never seen storm surge of this magnitude.
Bill Hogan says the water reached 2 or 3 feet in his house. He thinks the boat on his lawn came from 2 blocks away.
Which would give you some sense of, of how much water was here. There was at least 3 feet of water throughout the whole street.
Fort Myers among the hardest hit, from the waterfront to downtown to inland neighborhoods.
Lost everything we've had. Been in the house since 1987. Pictures, memories, gone.
Fort Myers Beach now a debris field. In Port Charlotte, flooding at a hospital's ICU.
We got people out of the ICU. The problem then ended up being that this water gushed down the stairwells, as you see there, and onto other floors.
The causeway to Sanibel Island breached in several places. Anyone who stayed there now cut off from the only link to the mainland. More than 2.5 million customers lost power, with repair crews just beginning to fan out. Officials warning residents that hazards remain.
You have power lines that are down, you have trees that are down, you have a lot of hazards right now.
And it's not just the West Coast.
Some of the flooding you're going to see in areas hundreds of miles from where this made landfall are going to set records.
Damage extending well into central Florida. Orlando saw more than a foot of rain, prompting high water rescues.
Holy mackerel. This first trailer here is actually underwater.
And residents at a nursing home evacuated. In Kissimmee, trapped victims brought to safety with airboats. This family saying they lost everything and were taken out a window. Another woman wishes she had evacuated before the storm.
I heard the neighbors screaming. I went to look out the window. Their car was submerged. So we tried to get the vehicles out, but it was too late.
Even in the east, Jacksonville and St. Augustine seeing coastal flooding and strong winds.
Yeah, shocking pictures there. If you are listening, make sure you go on our Facebook page. You can rewind the show and you can look at those pictures coming to us from Florida, courtesy of CNN. We'll cross to Fort Myers after 6 in Florida, where people have been rescued from their roofs and cars have been lifted and smashed in the hurricane winds. It is just gone 11 past 5. Kia mau tonu mai. You're listening to Checkpoint on RNZ National. The best news we've had in 10 years. Families of the Pike River miners surprised but happy to hear police will restart bore drilling at the mine. Police ended their bore drilling operation in March. It revealed the human remains of 8 miners. Over the last 4 months, police have been reviewing that evidence and are going back to drill 10 new boreholes to help work out if criminal charges can be laid. The families have waited nearly 12 long years for information on what happened, and police acknowledge that this latest development may prolong that wait, but they say it's a commitment to getting the answers they want. Samantha G reports.
The families of the men who died in the Pike River mine have long called for someone to be held accountable. Today, the news that police haven't given up on that.
The decision to undertake further drilling at the mine follows police consultation with an expert panel as part of an ongoing criminal investigation into the first explosion at the Pike River mine on the 19th of November 2010.
On the West Coast, surprise and satisfaction.
It's great news, quite a surprise to me. I thought all the boreholes had been drilled, but when the police contacted me saying that they've actually got some funding to do some more boreholes, it was music to my ears.
Anna Osborne's husband Milton died in the mine. She's campaigned tirelessly for answers and accountability.
only because, we need a prosecution if we want to get justice for our guys.
Bernie Monk, who lost his son Michael in the explosion, says the money spent drilling more boreholes could have been saved if the mine wasn't sealed before the investigation was completed.
It's probably the best news we've had for 10 years, but it's something that we've been going on ever since day one, and the authorities don't seem to be listening to anything that we're saying.
He says the whole process has been hugely frustrating.
Our experts, led by Tony Forster, put a plan in place to actually go into the mine, and Andrew Little in his wisdom took no notice, never even opened it, never even had a look at it. Now they're doing what he said that they should be doing.
In March, police ended their borehole drilling, abandoning the search for any remaining bodies. But Detective Superintendent Peter Reid says that evidence gave them valuable information about where the first explosion happened.
That's around the size of the explosion, the direction of the explosion, the fuel that's been used in the explosion, how the fuel for the explosion has got from where it originated to where it exploded.
That's crucial for working out if some of the men survived the first blast and were able to access their safety kits. Sonia Rockhouse, whose son Ben died, says the police wouldn't be drilling more boreholes if the situation didn't look promising.
As much evidence as they can get contributes to our possibility of future prosecutions. So absolutely, we'll take as many boreholes as they'll do, because the more they do, the more evidence they're going to find.
Detective Superintendent Peter Reid says experts have spent the last 4 months reviewing the investigation evidence that's been gathered so far.
We still have gaps in information, so the sites that we're going to be putting the new boreholes will be targeting what we believe will be evidence that either corroborates what we know already or paints the picture that we can answer the questions that will be required of us.
Anna Osborne says she's hopeful this brings the families some answers.
I can't wait for the boreholes to start happening and for them to get on with it. So that hopefully they get what they need and we can get those responsible in court.
Something they've waited nearly 12 long years for.
Samantha G there with that report. Let us know what you think of that story. Of course, it's been a real ongoing saga, the Pike River saga. Do you side with the families who say this is the right thing to do, or do you think it's too little too late and it's time to, stop spending public money on it? Text us 2101. You can also email us checkpoint@rnz. We'll also have something on 4-day weekends coming up again, 4-day weeks rather, coming up again later on. We're at the end of one. Did you enjoy it? Should they be permanent? And the Black Ferns, will you be going to the Black Ferns once the World Cup starts? Let us know, 2101. The school holidays are off to a soggy start in parts of the north with teeth-chattering temperatures predicted over the coming days in the south. Auckland's under a heavy rain watch, which could get pelted until Sunday. Watches are also in place for Northland, Gisborne and Hawke's Bay. Coromandel and parts of the Bay of Plenty could get even more, with heavy rain warnings in place. But will it start? Well, NIWA's principal scientist, Chris Brandolino, joins us now. Chris, I thought we were heading into summer. What's going on?
Kia ora, Nick. We are heading into summer, but it's an evolution, not a revolution.
Tell us what you mean by that, Chris. Come on.
Yeah, look, spring is always a finicky season. It's one of the more challenging, if not the most challenging season to forecast. The sun angle is climbing, and this time of the year, as September, October, it climbs pretty rapidly. So you're getting more heat from the sun. Days are longer. But winter, we still have cold seas around us, relatively speaking. So there are a lot of battles happening, and it can be a period where you have lots of variability, lots of changes, and with that can influence predictability, so accuracy. But generally speaking, the variability is something we're going to see, I guess, firsthand as we work our way through the weekend and next week. It's quite warm and humid. I'm based in Auckland, and it is not exactly warm in terms of, you want to wear shorts and a T-shirt. I have, but I'm a bit strange. But it's more humid. And however, farther south, it's quite cold. So if you take Invercargill, for example, tomorrow morning, early on, there'll be temperatures near or below zero. Meanwhile, up in Auckland and Whangarei and Kaitaia, temperatures tomorrow morning probably closer to 14 or 15 or 16 degrees. So, big contrast in temperature.
Yeah, it's muggy in Auckland at the moment, isn't it? Is the word to describe it.
Gooey.
And it's gooey, and it's never a good combination when you're walking to work in a suit, and it's you're soaking wet, but you're also sweaty from the mugginess, aren't you?
Exactly.
Yeah, let's put that picture out of our heads. But anyway, is this indicative of the next 3 months, Chris?
It is not. No, it is not. Not the temperatures. Look. We got a big drop of rain. Should mention that. We got that coming today and tomorrow for the North Island. It could be quite a bit of rain for the Bay of Plenty and Gisborne and Coromandel and the Auckland area. So if you are traveling, just kind of put this out there, for school holidays, especially by car, you really want to pay attention to the road and pay attention to conditions because there will be a meaningful, if not a significant kind of weather input to your travel and your time, how long it takes to get to your destination. So that's something to keep in mind. Now, to your question, no, it is not. In terms of temperature, we expect October to be a bit more variable. So to find, what I was talking about earlier, these changes. So next week, particularly say Tuesday and Wednesday, there'll be a blast of really cold air coming from the deep high latitudes off the ice of Antarctica. And that's really going to cool things off. I mean, we're talking, it'll feel like winter, even across the North Island for, good 2, 3, 4 days. But that is not going to be indicative of the season as a whole. I think as we progress through October, and so October will feature variability, but as we get toward the end of October, especially November and December, there will be a propensity, there will be a tendency to find more persistent warmth, more persistent high pressure. And when that happens, we're going to really start our seas to increase, to get warmer. Our ocean temperatures around Aotearoa, New Zealand, for the most part, are running well above average. Marine heat wave conditions, not to a point where you probably want to go in the water without a wetsuit, but they are running highly unusually warm. So really unusually warm, and that kind of gives us that marine heat wave classification. But as we get that settled weather I spoke about toward the end of October, and especially November and December, when you have long days, settled weather, that really starts to heat the ocean temperatures. And that has a kind of a positive feedback. So that has an upward influence on air temperatures because we are an island nation. We are really connected at the hip with what our ocean temperatures are doing. So if our ocean temperatures are running warmer than usual, then it's going to be really difficult to find any sustained periods of below average air temperatures. So that's what we had last year. And what's really causing this is La Nina. La Nina is a climate driver. And I'm going to ask you a question, Nick. I've said this before. I want to see if maybe you've heard this. Do you know what a climate driver is?
No idea.
Okay, climate driver is basically who is at the wheel of Mother Nature's car, okay? Mm-hmm. So if you know who's driving the car, you have an idea which direction you're going to head. And with La Nina, that is a climate driver. That has two hands on the steering wheel right now. And we tend to get more northeasterly and easterly winds, so there'll be a lack of westerlies. So that's a warm wind direction, and that tends to keep things warmer than usual. It also exposes places like Hawke's Bay, Bay of Plenty, Northland, Auckland, to heavy rainmakers like we're seeing this weekend. So that's something we'll have to watch as we head through the coming couple of months.
Yeah, okay. A little bit unsettled is the overriding theme I'm getting, Chris. Hey, thanks very much for your time. Chris Brandolino there from NIWA. I've got a half marathon on Sunday and it's looking like absolute crap.
Well, you're going to be an absolute hero, aren't you?
Excuse for an average time coming up. I sense an excuse for an average time. Anyway, we're going to go to Australia because it's COVID isolation rules will be scrapped from the 14th of October. It means even those with COVID will no longer have to isolate at home. At the moment, they have to isolate at home for 5 days. Of course, it's 7 here. The isolation mandate will only remain for aged care and hospital workers. Australian Prime Minister Anthony Albanese had this to say.
We wanted to make sure that we have measures which are proportionate and that are targeted at the most vulnerable. We want to continue to promote vaccinations as being absolutely critical, including people getting booster shots. And we want a policy that promotes resilience and capacity building and reduces a reliance on government intervention.
Support payments for people infected with COVID will also end on the 14th of October. Let us know what you think about that as well. Is it time for New Zealand to follow the lead, or do you think we should stick with our self-isolation rules? Again, you can text us 2101 or you can email checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. It is 22 minutes past 5. You're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. And still to come, 2,000 bus, ferry and train trips a day are being cancelled in Auckland. We have a look into why. But first, here's the headlines with Evie.
The police are returning to the Pike River mine to drill 10 new boreholes, which they hope will help them figure out what caused the fatal first explosion more than a decade ago. The November 2010 disaster resulted in the deaths of 29 miners. The decision has come as a welcome surprise to some of the families of those who died in the accident. A huge search and rescue effort is continuing in Florida in the aftermath of Hurricane Ian, which cut a coast-to-coast swathe of destruction across the US state. Boats and helicopters are being used to reach flood-stricken communities. More than 2.5 million homes and businesses have no electricity. Ian has regained hurricane strength after moving out over the Atlantic and is expected to hit South Carolina on Friday. A court has heard Gloria Vale members received almost $5 million in government funding in the 2021 financial year. Chartered accountant Gordon Hanson has been giving evidence in an employment court case brought by 6 former Gloria Vale members. He says Gloria Vale's sharing account is controlled by 3 senior men. And new coins featuring the portrait of King Charles have been revealed in the UK, with a 50p coin carrying his image entering general circulation within weeks. The coins follow centuries of tradition, with the monarch now facing left, the opposite way to Queen Elizabeth II. Those are the headlines. Looking at traffic in the South Island State Highway 1 at Belfield near Timaru, a serious crash has closed the road near the intersection with Luka Road. There's a strong wind warning in place between Springs Junction and Reefton. In Wellington State Highway 2, a slip on Dimutaka Hill has now been cleared. And in Auckland, a crash right on 5 o'clock is blocking the right northbound lane on State Highway 1 after Northcote Road off-ramp. Our next news headlines and traffic is at 5:40.
Thanks, Evie. I wonder why he's facing left. No idea. Charles.
TikTok? Maybe it's the monarchy's version of a TikTok. Left, right, left, right.
Maybe. Clay, do you know?
I'm not a TikTok.
Okay, sorry. We'll get to you, Clay, because momentum is building towards the start of the Rugby World Cup here in Aotearoa. We're just 8 days away, can you believe it, from the opening of the tournament, with organisers confirming today that more than 30,000 tickets have been sold for the triple header in Auckland. And joining me now is Clay Wilson. And when we say triple header, we mean 3 games on the same day, right?
They've lined up 3 games to open this tournament, finished off by, of course, that Black Ferns against Australia game. So a big day for these... for this tournament, for rugby fans, and like you say, over 30,000 tickets sold already. 8 days to go. I'm assuming we'll get a few more sold and then a walk-up crowd on the day. Hopefully they get a nice day, although that weather report earlier wasn't that promising. But it's going to break some records. It's already going to be the biggest crowd for a standalone women's sports event here in New Zealand. It's on track to break the match day record for the Women's Rugby World Cup, and they're also hoping that they might be able to sell out Eden Park. So very optimistic. Wow. I mean, that would be great, wouldn't it, for this event to start off with something like that. I think 47,000 is the capacity, so anything over 40,000 I think would be magic, wouldn't it, for the opening day of this tournament. There's been a lot of effort go in to make this opening day a success. You know, they've brought in British pop star Rita Ora, they've called in some big guns to try and really make this into an event and get people along, and clearly it's working. Over 30,000 tickets sold, so should be a great day.
Buy your ticket and get a free Rita Ora concert to go with it.
Correct.
It's not the worst deal in the world, eh?
Yeah.
And it comes, of course, as Sport NZ starts this campaign focused on women's sport.
Yeah, so they announced this yesterday, and the idea is to encourage more people to engage with and watch women's sport here in New Zealand. Sport New Zealand done some research that shows the awareness for female athletes is still significantly lower than it is for male athletes, and Raylene Castle, Sport New Zealand CEO, basically said this is a big opportunity to give women's sport some more visibility, get some more momentum behind it. You've got this Rugby World Cup, we've got the Fast 5 netball in November, and then of course the Women's Football World Cup, which we're sharing with Australia, is coming up next year. So very big opportunities for us to capitalise on that for women's sport here in New Zealand, and just global events we've seen in recent months. You'll know well the Euro football finals with the Lionesses. That was an amazing occasion, wasn't it? And got a huge sold-out crowd at Wembley and just massive coverage around the world. And then 91,000 for Barcelona against Real Madrid at the Camp Nou in the Champions League, for the Women's Champions League. So just goes to show there is that drive around the planet for women's sport, and that's what they're trying to push that here in New Zealand and really get on the back of these global events and make that happen here in Aotearoa.
And there's, I mean, particularly this Black Ferns team, it's packed with stars now, right? You've obviously got the halfback Kendra Cox-Edge, who's absolutely brilliant. Ruby Tui's there.
Yeah, Portia Woodman. Some of these players that have got that fame from sevens, that success from sevens that I guess a lot of people associate with the Olympic gold medalists and all the success that teams had. I mean, 7 tries Portia Woodman scored against Japan the other day. Just phenomenal. So they're sort of names that people can really get behind, they know, and just amazing athletes. So hopefully be good news for the Black Ferns and good news for the tournament in general.
Yeah, totally. And as Clay mentioned, a free concert, a free Rita or a concert to go with it. Thanks, Clay. Really appreciate it. And actually, just while you're there, I know you're both chomping at the bit to know. The reason Charles Face has left is because apparently it switches over each time the monarch changes. There you go.
I like my one
the
better.
TikTok thing.
It's more interesting.
Right? Yeah, like it's their version of TikTok.
They've got so many weird traditions.
All right, back on track, sorry. It is Friday, though, forgive us. Auckland commuters have been slow to return to public transport, but who would blame them? Many work from home at least part of the week, and the service is still, it's a little bit hit and miss. Auckland Transport says close to 2,000 trips are cancelled each day due to driver shortages and sickness. That's almost 15% of total trips by bus, train and ferry. Even with half-price fares on offer, they are still there, don't forget. The number of people taking public transport is still lagging pre-COVID times. Amy Williams reports.
It's not unusual for a dozen buses to be cancelled during the morning rush hour along Dominion Road, which stretches from Mount Roskill to the edge of the inner city. Those taking public transport to the city say cancellations are frustrating.
The buses do let a lot of people down sometimes. People aren't picked up at bus stops. Bus drivers want to drive the people all the way down the road before they let them off the bus aisle.
Could be a lot better, yeah.
I think it's pretty decent, but yeah, sometimes they're cancelled a lot.
But I feel like it's not the bus driver's fault, it's more like AT should just be better. I feel like, especially in a lot of other countries, it's way better transport.
It's getting better. Since the last timetable came in, I think the buses have been more consistent. I know they've been undermined a bit in terms of reliability by COVID, with so many people being ill and off and so on.
Public transport advocate Matt Lowry edits the blog Greater Auckland and says cancellations make it harder to attract people back onto trains, buses and ferries.
Cancellations of services have been absolutely devastating for public transport usage because it just makes it unreliable and people then get put off from trying public transport because if you've been left on the side of a road waiting for a bus to turn up in the rain and the cold, it doesn't leave a great experience.
But that's only half the story. Other big cities around the world, including London and Barcelona, are still recording public transport use stagnating at around 80% of pre-COVID levels. In Auckland, it's inched close to 70% for the first time since last year.
There is going to be a period of reduction of public transport use for probably a few years as a result of things like work from home. Auckland Transport had targeted very specifically commuters, particularly in the city centre, prior to COVID, and so therefore that has been one reason why Auckland has been perhaps more impacted than some other cities.
Auckland Transport oversees the city's public transport network. Its head of public transport optimisation, Richard Harrison, says they're still 20% short of drivers on bus and ferry services. Despite that, he says there are signs of improvement. This month, the number of passenger boardings tipped over 1.3 million a week, the most since August last year.
So we see a lot of people are just simply not travelling as much. The public transport network in Auckland is largely around commuters, and we don't have as many people commuting. It's that simple.
Auckland's public transport network is geared towards commuters, and Mr Harrison says that needs to change.
We would be keen to see people using the services more through the whole day, not just at those peak travel hours. We have got good coverage and good frequency into the evening, so people ought to be able to use public transport for leisure purposes as well.
With most people working from home at least some of the time, commuters are only part of the answer.
Amy Williams with that story. So another bit of feedback we would like from you. How's your local bus service? Is it reliable? Have you been using public transport more since the half-price fares came into place? Or do you prefer just to drive? Or do you prefer just to bike? Or do you walk? Or do you run? Or do you scooter? Or whatever. You can text us 2101. Or email checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. It is just coming up 5:33. It is time for business news with Nona Peltier. And Nona, we are starting on another survey. It's been survey week this week, hasn't it?
It's survey week every week, is it not?
True.
I don't know, it seems to be.
Yeah. All right, Fun Friday business. What have you got?
Well, not so much fun today.
Okay, sorry.
No, sorry. The survey that we're going to be talking about is the Consumer Confidence Survey. Yeah. And it's the ANZ Roy Morgan Consumer Confidence Survey. It's closely watched because it just happens to be closely watched. It was pessimistic, the reading error, 85.4. So anything under 100 indicates pessimism. That was for the month of September. And it was exactly the same in August. So it's in the doldrums, so to speak. But another thing that they found in this latest survey is a net 25% of households think it's a bad time to buy a major appliance. And that's one of the key indicators there for how the economy is tracking. And it's bad news for retailers because if you're not going to be spending money on a major appliance or what have you, this is going to be, it has a trickle-down effect. It means that consumers are feeling the pressure and are a little bit concerned about their future. Although, saying that, they are very optimistic about the labour market and wage growth. So, it's mixed signals, but we've been seeing a lot of that lately.
And, surprise, surprise, a naughty insurer. AIA fined $700,000, which is a drop in the bucket, really, isn't it? But for market misconduct. Tell us more.
Well, okay, so it is market misconduct, but it was self-reported. So the insurer found the mistakes themselves. They dated back some years back to 2014 and related to incorrect information, mistakes that they were making in their system. But these mistakes basically disadvantaged a number of their customers, 383 to be exact. And some of them ended up with claims that were unpaid, cover that they didn't end up having, inflation adjustment to policies that were unfair. Basically, it was just a poor and shoddy treatment of consumers. And the Financial Markets Authority decided to take them to task, even though it was self-declared, and even though they fixed all these errors and so on. The FMA thought it was worthwhile to take them to court, and they were fined $700,000 for making false and misleading representations to customers. And so what the FMA wants the rest of the industry to take from this is that they are serious about taking prosecutions. They're going to see themselves being fined. And of course, this isn't good publicity for an organization the size of AIA.
The markets, please.
Right. Well,
okay.
On that happy
This was supposed to be Fun Friday business.
Oh, I'm so sorry to say that our index, it closed down. This is the top 50 index. It closed down 1.2%. So that's not a very good finish. And actually, it's, I think, pretty much in line with what we've seen in Asia, which is pretty much the worst month we've seen for a long time since the onset of COVID, according to some of this report here. Now, so we were down 1.2%. It was a 134-point drop to 11,066. The New Zealand dollar, as well as the Australian, slipped against the big dollar again. Again, this is their worst monthly performance since April. The dollar is trading at 57.1 US cents, 88.1 Australian, 51.5 British pence. Not a great week.
No. A battling
but
week.
Next week, another week.
There's always next week, isn't there? Hey, have a great weekend. Any plans? Staying dry.
Well, I've got an umbrella for that.
There you go. Yeah, Good thinking. You'll need one. Hey, thanks, Nona. Nona Peltier there with our business news. Before our next story, a little bit of traffic. There's been a crash in the Waterview Tunnel in Auckland, and two right lanes southbound are blocked. There is lots of traffic in the area, we're told, so expect delays there. Right, employers say offering a 4-day working week is what the future should look like. There's a global pilot on at the moment, testing out the idea, and the concept is backed by the Council of Trade Unions. COVID forced many companies to change the way they work, with some opting for shorter weeks to strike a better work-life balance. But would that work for everyone? Here's our reporter, Haisa Almeida.
It is the end of a short week. So what about doing this every week? For construction software company Conca, it is the reality. In March, the company started testing out a 4-day week to see how it would impact culture and productivity.
There was a lot of toing and froing that we had to work out of, okay, if we're working 4 days, we still have customers to support, we still have our sales and delivery team. How do we change our business model to ensure that people can be at the right place at the right time?
Conca's product manager Damon Henson says the plan was to run the trial for 10 days. But almost 7 months down the track, the initiative is still in place and the company has decided to extend it until the end of the year. Mr. Henson says while the feedback was positive, challenges started to pop up.
People still trying to feel that they needed to fit the same amount of work into 32 hours that they were doing in 40, when actually the shift that we had to make was to ensure that time was just better utilised and that we were being more efficient.
The work day remains 8 hours, and crucially, the pay is the same as a 5-day week. Damon Henson says a 4-day week not only made the team happy, but helped attract new talents to the business.
The calibre and the numbers of good candidates jumped when we made this known on our blog. It just took a massive leap.
In Whangarei, one shop has already been operating with shorted weeks for the last 4 years. Tony Gordon Panel Beaters and Auto Painters has 6 employees and gives them all Saturdays, Sundays and Mondays off, with longer shifts on the other 4 days of the week. Owner Kevin Hurley says shorter weeks is the ultimate perk a company can offer.
You can give people and offer people a lot of stuff, perk and incentives, but give people time. Time is something you can't buy.
Mr. Hurley says if more businesses adopt the practice, companies will have happier employees and enhanced productivity.
And that's the mental thing, I believe, with a lot of companies is this is what we do and this is what we do. We've got to get your head out of the sand and move to the future. You know, the hours we've been working, I don't know how many years that's been around now, but maybe it's time for the next phase.
On the streets of Auckland, people are wondering if the system would work for everyone.
I would love the idea, but there are a whole lot of other factors that come into play, such as pay. Would you get paid the same as your 5-day week or only 4 days?
Absolutely. It would really suit me and my lifestyle. Obviously, everything else would have to get in place before, but I think live your life for living rather than working.
So it might be a pipe dream for some and a real possibility for others. COVID changed the way so many of us work. This might be just another result of that.
It's 5:40, you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. Kia ora e te iwi, homai o whakaro. Don't forget you can text us on 2101 and you can tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ, Facebook us Checkpoint or email checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. Now it's time for Evie with the headlines.
The mother of a man who died in the Pike River mine disaster says she's more optimistic than ever that enough evidence will now be found to launch a prosecution over the deaths. The police are returning to the Pike River mine to drill 10 new boreholes, which they hope will help them to figure out what caused the fatal first explosion more than a decade ago. Health New Zealand knew for about 2 months about wheels flying off mobile dental clinics before it issued a safety alert. Twice wheels have flown off the heavy trailers while they were being towed, endangering other motorists. Waka Kotahi and police have been involved for years over investigations to find a cause. Health NZ says it found out in July about the failures. A fourth mid-Canterbury farm has been confirmed to have the cattle disease Mycoplasma bovis. The new farm is near the infected Ansco feedlot near Ashburton, which houses about 12,000 cattle. Close to 2,000 bus, train and ferry trips are still being cancelled each day on Auckland's public transport network due to driver shortages and sickness. Public transport advocate Matt Lowry says cancellations make it harder to attract people back and onto public transport. And NIWA's principal scientist says cool temperatures seen across much of the country won't last. Chris Brandolino has told Checkpoint the weather will vary for a little while, but not for the whole season. Those are the headlines. Looking at traffic in Auckland, a crash is blocking one right lane on the Waterview Tunnel southbound on State Highway 20. The second lane has been cleared. One last vehicle needs to be towed out of the way. And State Highway 1 at Belfield near Timadu remains closed near the intersection with Looker Road. The serious crash unit is on site. Our next news and weather is at 6.
Thanks, Evie. Are you a bus catcher?
I actually really love catching the bus.
Yeah. Have you had any issues?
No.
Okay. These people have. Nick in Auckland has. He says he lives in Auckland and he loves the bus and train, but they do not run with good frequency, very late, so my wife and I are often driving when we're eating out. Not great. No. This is even worse. This is from Keith. Forget buses, Auckland Rail is the most dysfunctional rail system I have ever witnessed in the world, okay? AT, take note, that's pretty damning. And one more, both my kids catch the bus to their different schools in Auckland and have 2 to 3 cancelled at key times. Yeah, not ideal.
And then they have to take a bus to the rest of their destination.
Well,
train or bus.
More often than not, we have to drop them off.
Oh.
Very suboptimal. And another car on the road, of course. Okay, keep it coming. Not great for Auckland Transport so far. Text us with the rest of your bus and train stories on 2101. Right, with most people having discarded their mask now that the rules are almost completely over, lots of them have ended up as landfill or litter. But the country's largest mask manufacturer is offering customers a way to recycle them into fence posts. Yep, fence posts. Reporter Louise Tanuth and camera operator Marika Habazi went to find out more.
They were our must-have accessory for the last 2.5 years of our life. But what happens to masks now they're barely needed anymore? The majority of the ones made in New Zealand are made of polypropylene plastic that gets sent offshore or to landfills. Now, one of the country's largest mask manufacturers, Mio, is trying to change that.
So we launched an initiative to invite members of the public and our customers to send their used face masks back to us, and we then group everything together and send this off to our partner, who then they'll recycle that properly.
Director Kenneth Leong says they're taking any brand of used mask and plan to ramp it up to take them from schools, hospitals and businesses.
Hopefully we'll see a snowball effect. We'll have other companies come on board and larger retailers, larger shopping centres come on board and provide collection points for people to dispose of these masks and properly, and then have them recycled.
That all happens here in Waiuku at Future Posts. They've been recycling plastics destined for landfill and turning them into fence posts for the last 4 years. They recycle just under 300 tonnes of plastic a month. Last year, they added masks to the list.
I see a hell of a problem. And I saw these floating around the countryside, as most people do, and I thought, I wonder if we can use them in our mix.
Director Jerome Wenslick explains the process from mask to post.
We then chip it up into tiny little bits, mix it together into a recipe, depending on the type of plastic. Pretty much we melt the plastic, so we heat it up to around 220 degrees, and that gets forced into a mould, the shape of a post, be it round or square or in between.
Once the fence posts have been made, they're perfectly safe for all uses, from benches to gardens. The posts are used worldwide for different projects, mostly in farming. They're getting 5 to 6 tonnes a month of masks, but with 2 factories on the way in Blenheim and Fielding, they've got capacity for 3 times that.
We leave them for at least a month, just so if there is anything in there, it's gone. These ones here are brand new ones that I think they expired, so they're pretty clean. But yeah, the used ones we use a bit more protection.
All of the recycling is done without any support from council or the government, something both companies would like to see change. General Manager of Waste Solutions at Auckland Council, Parul Sud, says it's not that simple when it comes to recycling masks on a larger scale.
It's not easy for us to collect them through any of our systems, so it'll have to be places where people visit. And then if you're wearing a mask, would you take it off right then? Or would you collect it at home and then bring it to a drop-off? So it's not an easy one to manage.
Instead, she suggests people should try for reusable masks. And if that's not possible, dispose of them properly.
There is definitely a decent amount that's gone into landfills. The bigger impact I think masks would have is as litter. What ends up on our streets, what ends up in our waterways. Let's try and use products that actually can be reusable rather than disposable. So I think keeping in line with that, because recycling is not always the answer.
These piles of boxes and bags full of disposable masks in Waiuku are proof the problem still stands.
Yeah, that is a great Kiwi business story. It's well worth a look. If you're not watching, you can watch it on our website. We will put Louise and Marika's story up there. Right, it's not every day you run into an 11-year-old lawn mowing contractor, but then again, New Plymouth youngster Caden Wallace-Potros is not your everyday kid. The Central Primary School pupil already owns 2 mowers and an edge trimmer, that's a lot more than I own, and has a burgeoning client base to brag about. Our Taranaki Whanganui reporter Robin Martin met the budding entrepreneur.
From small beginnings come great things, right? And so it was with Caden Contracting.
My dad's friend texted him and asked him if he could get me to mow his lawns, because I used to mow my dad's lawns quite a bit.
So on his 11th birthday, Caden was given a lawnmower, and one thing led to another.
They signed me up for a business, and then I was like, yes, please. So we did that, and we've been doing it for 6 months.
In the meantime, the local Ryobi dealer has gifted Caden its latest electric model to save on fuel costs. And he certainly knows one end of a lawnmower from the other.
Well, it's electric. It's a lot different than any other lawnmowers. It takes batteries. If you can see down here, it's got batteries. That's a safety switch. And you just pop it off like that.
Caden's mum, Chelsea Potros, says she and husband Mark wanted to teach their son about the value of money, and she's been blown away by his work ethic.
I'm super proud of him, to be honest. Just the motivation and the determination he's got to keep going. He currently was on an Xbox in the middle of a game before we came to this. But yeah, he happily got off, and out the door we go, and here we are.
Caden charges about $30 an hour, and there's been no shortage of clients. Alana Anderson runs Kiwi Bike Insurance. Caden's business proposition came along at just the right time for her lawn mowing dilemma.
We used to have 2 lovely elderly gentlemen that used to come along and do it for us. One would start at one end and the other would start at the other end. But unfortunately they retired. So we don't have a lawnmower here, so we thought, well, let's start looking for someone, and we saw Caden's post on Facebook. So we thought, hey, let's message him and see if he can do the job for us.
And there's been no complaints thus far.
Look, he's done an absolutely fantastic job for us. He comes along with his lovely mum, who brings him in on a fortnightly basis and does the job for us for $30 a week, $30 a fortnight, so can't complain.
Although Caden has long since saved enough money for the Xbox he initially wanted, he's still enjoying the work.
Do you still love lawn mowing?
Yes.
Why?
Definitely one of my top favourite things.
Why is that?
Well, I get to help out people, and it just makes me feel happy about myself.
It may be lawn mowing for now, but Caden plans to graduate to diggers and trucks in the future and go after the big dollars.
Good on you, Caden. I get to help out people, and that makes me feel happy about myself. Geez, isn't that a great sentiment? Good on you. Robin's story will also be up on our website, and it is also well worth a watch. It is 5:51. Kia mau tonu mai. You're listening to Checkpoint on RNZ National. A new children's health unit in Wellington will provide special care for families from Hawke's Bay, Taranaki, Marlborough and all in between. Te Waunui was blessed at dawn before being formally opened by the Governor-General and Health Minister. Our reporter Kirsty Frame and cameraman Samuel Rillstone were at the ceremony this morning.
Ready? One, two, three.
The beginning of a new chapter for children's health. Te Waunui will care for up to 151 tamariki, both short and long term. It's a place no whānau wants to be, but some can't avoid. If you could sum up the interiors in one word, it's spacious.
Every single bed will have a pull-down bed for a parent to stay on next to the child, so they're not going to need to sleep in a lazy boy or make do. They can get a good night's rest as well.
Rosalind Wood is a paediatrician and co-clinical leader for Child Health Services. She says particularly in the RSV epidemic last year, it was challenging not having the space.
One of those children would cry and wake up all the other children. By the time I came to do a ward round, half the parents were in tears as well. They're so exhausted. And those poor little babies, those poor parents, they're just all utterly exhausted. It's a very difficult space to get well in.
That won't be the case any longer. It's a dream turned into a reality, thanks to huge generosity from local property developers Mark Denijczyk and Dorothy Spotswood. They donated $53 million. That was later matched by the government, and the remaining $10 million was fundraised by the community. Nicholas Volpicelli-Mulo was a special part of the project. A broken collarbone when he was 14 led to a discovery of a bone tumour.
It was a very scary thing to come across as a child. So through that, I had to have regular checkups at the hospital.
His time in the wards inspired him to fundraise over the last 3 years. He raised money for 55 TVs so that kids can have that much-needed distraction.
So it feels really good because just seeing that, what's something that started, as almost a project to try help people actually came true.
Nicholas is intending to study medicine himself next year. The Health Minister, Andrew Little, says the new facility would not be here if it wasn't for the community.
The government of the day has got a responsibility to make sure hospital facilities are there. But some of those extra things that just make the difference, great when other people can contribute. But one thing is for sure, that we would not have this facility in this way without Mark Denijczyk and Dorothy Spotswood and their very generous contribution.
The health centre is mostly just for beds. Patients needing care will still need to go over the bridge to the main hospital. Minister Little says while the new space hasn't added any extra bed capacity, it will free up more space in the general hospital for other care services.
There are a range of other projects still in the queue for the main hospital, including upgrading ED, but the more space we add and create, then the more of the existing facilities we can free up and repurpose.
The facility will be up and running for patients from October 17th.
A sanctuary in Christchurch is proving you can teach old dogs new tricks. Dog Watch has finally said goodbye to Boss after 788 days in their shelter. That's 2 years, 8 months or more than 14 dog years. He's graduated with flying colours into a loving new home. Dog Watch Sanctuary Trust General Manager Bridget Patterson is here to tell me about the turnaround. Happy Friday to you, Bridget.
Thanks, Nick.
Tell us about Boss. Tell us his story. Tell us why it's taken this long to get him into a home.
So Boss came to us, he was picked up by the Christchurch City Pound and came to us 28th of July 2020. He's a big, beautiful brown dog, but although he's such a big boy, it quickly became evident that he was a very, very anxious dog on the inside. He was uneasy with new people. He felt the need to protect his resources, so food bowls, blankets, beds, and he had a huge fear of moving traffic to the point where one of his first walks with one of our trainers, he ended up in a paddock full of bulls because he was so desperate to get away from the road.
Yeah, so are you seeing, how did Boss come into your care?
So he was picked up by the Christchurch City Council pound. They picked dogs up and then they, of course, advertised them to try and find their owner. But in Boss's case, nobody came. And then they called on Dog Watch, and of course we came to the rescue.
And so are you seeing more dogs being, well, for want of a better word, dumped in this fashion, and dumped with these issues, in Boss's case, anxiety issues?
Yes, unfortunately, a lot of people going through financial hard times, and dogs are expensive to keep. So often if a dog does start to have a problem, whether it's a medical problem or an issue with behaviour, then people don't always seek the right assistance or can't afford to seek assistance, and sadly, a number of dogs will be dumped.
Yeah, tell us about the work you've had to put in with Boss to get him to this stage and into a new home.
So we have the most amazing team of trainers. Our volunteers are incredible and our staff fantastic. Boss's new mum, Lisa, actually went through a 16-week process to get to know Boss, to learn all his various little problems, individual personality traits, and it was just a massive team effort to get him to the point where he's now in a happy home.
Do you know much about each dog's background? Like, take Boss, for example. What sorts of things would generally lead to this behaviour, which obviously isn't his fault?
Absolutely no dogs born with behaviour issues or any sort of unnatural fears, but unfortunately when these dogs are picked up by the pound, we have very little information or anything to go on as to why they have the problems that they have. So we've really just got to work through it all as a team, and it is quite a challenge.
Yeah, great outcome. Thanks so much for your time, Bridget. That is Bridget Patterson, who is the General Manager of Dog Watch Sanctuary Trust. Right, a little bit of feedback before the news on transport. Ferry cancelled 10 minutes before departure this morning. Left me to stand in the rain until the next one. AT/Fullers must have known well before the scheduled departure time. Very common on the Gulf Harbour route, apparently, and frustrating, they say. Yep, definitely frustrating. Instead of public transport to travel to/from work, I drive to the train station as a connection between train. I assume that means as bus is too unreliable. I would much prefer to do the full trip using public transport. And one more from Wellington. Super crowded half-fare buses and doddery pensioners and now maybe active COVID cases. Okay, yeah, not a good recipe. Just something positive before we go. I love catching the bus, and although there are sometimes cancellations, I use the app and can plan around them.
RNZ News at 6 o'clock. Good evening. Paul Marie, Koivi Ashton, Themnei. Boats and helicopters are being used to reach flood-stricken communities in Florida in the aftermath of Hurricane Ian. More than 700 people have been rescued, but there are fears many lives have been lost. The BBC's Luis Fajardo reports from Miami.
The federal government mobilized more than 1,000 people, and of course the state authorities and the county and municipal forces have been deployed. One of the problems is that a lot of people apparently did not evacuate when they were told to do so. They decided to stay and try to ride out the storm. And now, of course, throughout the day, the emergency services have been trying to rescue them. Of course, that's one of the reasons that authorities from President Biden onwards have been warning that the death toll could increase.
The mother of a man who died in the Pike River mine disaster says she's more optimistic than ever that enough evidence will now be found to launch a prosecution over the deaths. Police say further borehole drilling is imperative to ensure the investigation team can determine what caused the first explosion in November 2010. Sonia Rockhouse, whose son Ben was one of the 29 men who died, says police can't make any promises, but she feels they wouldn't be drilling more boreholes if things didn't look promising.
You know, as much evidence as they can get contributes to our possibility of future prosecutions. So absolutely, you know, we'll take as many boreholes as they'll do, because the more they do, the more evidence they're going to find.
Sonia Rockhouse says she's glad to see the work done now, even if it is later than they would have liked. Health New Zealand knew for about 2 months about wheels flying off mobile dental clinics before it issued a safety alert. Twice wheels have flown off the heavy trailers in 2017 and 2020 while they were being towed, endangering other motorists. Waka Kotahi and police have been involved for years over investigations to find a cause. Health NZ says the conclusion now is that the incorrect wheel assembly was attached to the hub. It says it found out in July about the failures. It says it made a priority of pinning down the exact nature of the problem and issued the alert as soon as it could. Waka Kotahi hasn't responded to RNZ for comment. A fourth mid-Canterbury farm has been confirmed to have the cattle disease Mycoplasma bovis. The new farm is near the infected Ansco feedlot near Ashburton, which houses about 12,000 cattle. Just last week, the Ministry for Primary Industries announced a controlled area notice around the feedlot and that culling of stock there would begin soon. M Bovis Programme Director Simon Andrew says it's likely the disease has spread to more farms within the controlled area.
As we've signalled, there is a property within the Wakanui area that we're doing additional testing on at the moment that is likely to be confirmed, and we did expect this, and we are doing a significant amount of surveillance as we have throughout the course of the program to ensure that we are removing any of the final pockets of infection that are out there.
Simon Andrew says MPI is still investigating how the disease has been spreading. Close to 2,000 bus, train and ferry trips are still being cancelled each day on Auckland's public transport network due to driver shortages and sickness. Auckland Transport says that's almost 15% of total trips. It says it's seen an increase in usage in recent weeks to almost 70% of pre-COVID levels. Public transport advocate Matt Lowry says cancellations make it harder to attract people back onto trains, buses and ferries.
Cancellations of services have been absolutely devastating for public transport usage because it just makes it unreliable and people then get put off from trying public transport because if you've been left on the side of a road waiting for a bus to turn up in the rain and the cold, it doesn't leave a great experience.
Matt Lowry says public transport usage is likely to remain low while many people work from home. Volcanologists say White Island hasn't had any further emissions since the 18th of September. Previously, Whakaari White Island sent a long plume of steam into the sky, which GNS Science said was a passive emission of ash. It's since lowered the aviation colour code to yellow, indicating that further emissions are unlikely to interfere with flights. But the volcanic alert level remains at level 2 as the Institute continues to measure moderate to heightened unrest in the area. GNS Science plans to visit the island over coming days to repair broken monitoring equipment. NIWA's principal scientists says cool temperatures seen across much of the country won't last. Auckland is under a heavy rain watch until Sunday. Watches are also in place for Northland, Gisborne and Hawke's Bay. Coromandel and parts of the Bay of Plenty could get even more with heavy rain warnings in place. Chris Brandolino has told Checkpoint the weather will vary for a little while, but not for the whole season.
The sun angle is climbing, and this time of the year, as September, October, it climbs pretty rapidly, so you're getting more heat from the sun, days are longer. But winter, we still have cold seas around us, relatively speaking. So there are a lot of battles happening.
Chris Brandolino says those travelling by car for the school holidays should be mindful of the conditions. And comedian Trevor Noah has announced he's standing down as the host of The Daily Show in the US. The 38-year-old South African has hosted the satirical news and talk show on the Comedy Central TV network since taking over from Jon Stewart in 2015. He says he'll announce the timing of his departure later. Noah has indicated that he wants to devote more time to stand-up comedy. That's the news.
Investing in better infrastructure for shipping. It's investing in a whole lot of infrastructure that supports New Zealanders and our way of life and the fact that we want to live in a prosperous country where people can be educated and we've got the money to fulfil the great social services that we've had.
That's true. We want everything, but we also want to still be alive as a species. So that's probably the most imperative thing, isn't it? So that's where the answer has to be found. It lies somewhere in there. Up to date if you're up late. Lately with Karen Hay every weeknight from 10 on RNZ National.
This is RNZ National Te Reo Irirangi o Aotearoa. We're on air on rnz.co.nz and on your mobile with the RNZ app. You're with Nick Truebridge on Checkpoint Next. Right now, the short forecast from Met Service to midnight Saturday. From Northland to Taranaki, including the Bay of Plenty and the Central High Country, also Gisborne, Hawke's Bay and Wairarapa. Periods of rain or showers, heavy falls expected in Coromandel, Bay of Plenty and northern Gisborne, possibly also for Northland and Hawke's Bay, north of Napier. Thunderstorms possible for Waikato, Waitomo and Western Bay of Plenty this afternoon. From Whanganui and Manawatu, high cloud today, occasional rain tomorrow. From Horowhenua to Wellington, also for Nelson and Marlborough, mostly cloudy with scattered rain. Canterbury, partly cloudy today with isolated light showers, fine tomorrow, apart from patchy morning drizzle north of Darfield. Otago and Southland also, Bulla, Westland and Fiordland, generally fine. Showers about Bulla, Southland and Clutha, clearing this afternoon. And for Rekohu, the Chatham Islands, partly cloudy, becoming fine tomorrow afternoon. It's 7 minutes past 6. Our next news headlines are at 6:30.
No mai hockey mai, this is Checkpoint. I'm Nick Truebridge. Floridians woke up to catastrophic devastation this morning after Hurricane Ian slammed into the state's southwestern coast. At least 17 people are dead, but US President Joe Biden is warning it could be the most deadliest hurricane in the state's history. Ian was downgraded to a tropical storm as it moved east, but has since upgraded again to a hurricane. In a moment, we'll hear from CNN's Gloria Vale, but first, here's her report.
As daylight broke Thursday, it revealed catastrophic devastation in Florida in the wake of Hurricane Ian. Entire neighborhoods underwater, power lines turned down, debris scattered in streets. Residents in Florida now trying to pick up the pieces.
If I would have knew it was going to be this bad, I would have got me and my family out ahead of time.
Search and rescue crews from multiple agencies rushing to help people trapped in their homes. But in areas like Sanibel Island, it's impossible to get there by car because the causeway is the only connection to Florida's mainland, and it's now in pieces.
As you can imagine, it is pretty devastating. And what it really does is left the place almost unrecognizable in some places.
Hurricane Ian slammed Florida's southwestern coast Wednesday as a Category 4 storm, bringing life-threatening storm surge, historic flooding, and winds near 150 miles per hour. But it's not just the coast that was slammed. As the storm turned east, it dumped rain on central Florida, triggering freshwater flooding.
This could be the deadliest hurricane in Florida's history.
As Florida assesses the devastating damage, President Joe Biden saying the federal government will be sending funds for emergency response efforts.
And a short time ago, I spoke with Gloria, who is in Fort Myers.
88% of the city is still experiencing power outages. So a lot of people without power in a town that was absolutely leveled by the storm. The downtown area of Fort Myers is basically gone. I drove in here from Tampa earlier today, and even along the way, you can see the path of destruction of this storm. Picture a tin can. The way you rip that top off of the can, that's what roofs on some homes here in Florida look like. Completely moved off their foundation, roofs completely ripped off the top of houses. It's a devastating scene here in Florida.
Yeah, and we're just looking at some of your pictures, total devastation, as you say, really, people who have lost everything, their homes, their livelihoods. I see the mayor describing it is looking like, well, more of a war zone than a town or a city. Can you tell us about some of the individual stories you've heard from people today who have been displaced?
People have lost their entire homes, their whole lives gone. Everything they've worked for so many years. They're going to have to start from scratch. That is traumatic for people, but communities try to band together. Tomorrow, here in the city of Fort Myers, there will be a food and water distribution because at this point, people are still very much in need of just the basic necessities.
Where can people go, Gloria? Obviously, as you said earlier, there are, well, hundreds, if not thousands of houses that have been levelled in the face of this storm. Where are people going?
Shelter, and wherever they can take refuge, whether it's with family or with friends, hotels in the area. I checked into a hotel about an hour and a half outside of Fort Myers, and the place was packed with people who had tried to flee the storm several hours before that. You talk about the devastation of the homes. The governor surveyed the area here earlier today, trying to assess the damage. Some of the homes, all that's left is just the concrete slab where the foundation once laid. So there are going to be people here, especially in the area of Fort Myers and Naples, which has been so devastated, that they're coming back to nothing. And that means they're homeless. That means they're going to have to find a place to stay. That's just a crushing thing to think about. So much lost in such a quick amount of time. I spoke with a man earlier today who was out by a pier checking on his boat, and he offered some perspective. He said to me that, the boat is damaged, the boat can be replaced, but he's okay, and he cannot be replaced, and his family cannot be replaced. So even in the face of incredible loss, material loss, and for some people, the loss of life, people, try to see the best in all of this, that they have each other, they have their family, they have their loved ones, and they're just going to have to band together and start all over again.
What about government support, Gloria? Will there be any?
Absolutely. There's been several emergency declaration orders that have been approved in the last few hours. And President Biden spoke about the tragedy here in Fort Myers earlier today. He said this storm is on track to be one of the worst natural disasters that has hit this area. So the federal government will certainly be expected to step in addition to local and state governments here in Florida. But this is going to be a long process because there are people who have lost everything, and rebuilding takes a long time. There's an area of Florida that is only accessible by a bridge. That bridge collapsed in the storm last night. So people there can't get in, can't get out. Rescue workers have been trying to get into the area, but it's going to be difficult.
CNN's Gloria Paz-Mino there speaking to us from Fort Myers. President Vladimir Putin will hold a signing ceremony tomorrow to annex territories under Russian occupation in Ukraine. A stage has been set up in Moscow's Red Square with billboards proclaiming the areas as part of Russia. It follows hastily so-called referendums held in 4 regions which have been dismissed as a farce by Ukraine and its allies. The UN is warning the annexation will mark a dangerous escalation. The BBC's Stephen Rosenberg reports.
For months, war felt so far from Russia's capital. It's feeling much closer now. Moscow mobilised. The special operation advertised on bus stops and billboards. Russia calls them heroes, but it needs more. So more men are ordered to the call-up centres and sent to Ukraine. Conditions are basic. These draftees have no beds. These do, sort of. And he says his group is being sent straight to Ukraine without any military training. And the president, he's escalating this conflict. Tomorrow, Vladimir Putin is expected to start the annexation of 15% of Ukrainian territory. There's little excitement about that on the streets of Moscow.
I feel negative about it because it's the territory of Ukraine.
I think it is historically Russian territory.
I think it's a total disaster, not only for Ukraine, but also for Russia.
What's more, the Kremlin call-up has sparked widespread fear. In all the years I've been covering Russia, in all the places I've been, there's one phrase more than any other I've heard from people here. We must avoid war. This country knows very well the the cost of war. Millions of people were killed here fighting Nazi Germany. And yet today, the Russian leadership is calling up and sending its citizens to the front line and annexing large parts of its neighbour. And look what can happen to those who oppose war, like Artyom Kamardin, who read out an anti-war poem. Police raided his flat, and the nightmare began. Artyom's fiancée, Sasha, was there when the police burst in.
They dragged me across the floor by my hair. They started supergluing stickers to my face. They threatened to glue my mouth up. Then I heard the beating from the room where Artyom was. They forced him to undress. I heard how they were talking about raping him. They filmed everything they did to Artyom. They grabbed me by the hair and showed me a photo of him, naked and beaten up, covered in blood.
Russia's invasion is having devastating consequences for Ukraine and for Russia too.
It's coming up 18 minutes past 6 and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. Country star Shania Twain's latest album is inspired by her bad experience with COVID. Just years after recovering from vocal paralysis from Lyme disease, she has sold more than 100 million records worldwide. And as the BBC's Mark Savage reports, not bad for someone who just wanted to be Stevie Wonder's backing singer.
It is so true. I did just want to be a backup singer. Not that just, because trust me, being Stevie Wonder's backup singer is not easy. And I didn't have any desire to be in the front. I'm very, very nervous about it. And, always had terrible stage fright.
It was fate that pushed Shania Twain to the front of the stage. When she was 21, both of her parents died in a car crash, and Shania took a job singing at a local resort to keep food on the table for her younger siblings. That led to a recording contract and eventually more than 100 million album sales. It took her a long way from a troubled childhood in Canada.
Well, as a very young child, music was a great escape for me. So there was a lot of violence in the household, or maybe we didn't have enough to eat, so I'm hungry. Going through the humiliation of going to school dirty, we didn't have hot water a lot of the time, so, your hair is greasy and you're smelly, you can't wash your clothes, just stuff like that. And having to be able to carry on anyway without letting it shut you down.
One thing that came across to me, both from reading your autobiography and watching the documentary on Netflix, is the strength that you've displayed throughout your life. And I wondered, not just where does that come from, but how do you sustain that?
The sustaining is the easy part. It's developing it. So I made it through my childhood. The rest was a lot easier. Was by the time I went to Nashville, I'm like, okay, I'm not afraid of a few sexist men or a few critical people. This just doesn't scare me. I sort of see my guitar as like a teddy bear. It's like, if there's a guitar in the room, I just want to sit and hold it. I don't need to do anything with it. It's just kind of like a blankie.
And I guess you still do that now. This record's a reaction to the pandemic.
Very much so. Good point. I'm like, oh my God, I gotta cheer myself up. It's time to start happy therapy, which to me, that was writing happy songs. I'm saying a lot of very direct things in the music. There's a song called What You Gonna Do With That Air? That is just, I had a very bad bout with COVID, pneumonia. It was very touch and go. And I was so inspired by just breathing, the anxiety of running out of air. What you gonna do with that air? What you gonna do with that air? So when I say that the album's fun and chirpy, there's a lot of deep things I needed to say, but that I needed to say with a smile.
That's what I've always liked about your music, though. Even when you're talking about quite serious issues, and you've talked a lot about sexism in your music,
yeah.
You do it not in a combative way, but in a celebratory way.
Absolutely. I mean, every man on the planet sings Man, I Feel Like a Woman. Man, I feel like a woman. Every man I see singing that song is doing it in a good spirit, because my intention was that. It was written in a positive spirit. You know, this is not a man's world and it's not a woman's world. This is our world. And we share it, and we have to share it respectfully. But I will stand up for myself, and I will tell you if I feel you've crossed the line.
Yeah, she's awesome. Australians sent to Antarctica have been raising distressing allegations of widespread and predatory sexual harassment on remote research stations. Their complaints have been detailed in an external review of culture in Antarctica. Australia's Federal Environment Minister says the revelations are gobsmacking. Any woman who report unwelcome requests for sex and taunts from men in the world's most isolated place can't leave and have to continue working alongside the people they've complained about, the ABC's Henry Bello reports.
Meredith Nash has spent months listening to women posted to Antarctic stations, and she's disturbed by what she's been told.
They particularly described experiences of unwanted sexual attention, so sexist jokes, for example, or invitations for sex.
The Associate Dean at the Australian National University was hired by the Australian Antarctic Program to examine cultural problems and to make recommendations. The de-identified summary of her report includes instances of homophobia, taunting, offensive pornography and gender-based insults. It also reveals a basic lack of knowledge about personal hygiene in an historically male-dominated workforce.
They aren't provided with appropriate menstrual products, or even just that their field gear is not made to accommodate women's bodily needs when it comes to toileting or trying to, change a menstrual product.
The report reveals women felt compelled to hide their periods while on field missions, fearing men may judge them as incompetent or weak. When women run out of sanitary products, they have to ask what's been described as a gatekeeper, who is often a man, for more. In some cases, women feel forced to improvise or keep products inside their body for longer than recommended because no facilities are available.
I think on some level it's unethical for us to continue to try and encourage women to enter male-dominated fields if we're not confident ourselves that our organisations can keep them safe.
The report's findings are not disputed by the Australian Antarctic Division or the Environment Minister Tanya Plibersek, who says this must spark change.
I was actually gobsmacked to read some of the reports here talking about, pornographic images up on walls. I really did think we had eradicated this sort of thing from Australian workplaces decades ago. It's not acceptable.
Some women described the sexual harassment as predatory and widespread, permeating the stations.
I found that extremely concerning, and I've been very clear with the department that we need to make sure that every person working either at head office or in Antarctica feels safe. If they have a complaint to make, they can make that complaint without any fear of victimisation.
The director of the Australian Antarctic Division, Kim Ellis, says all 42 recommendations will be accepted and some have already been implemented, including restrictions on alcohol.
I'm deeply disappointed, and I have to say there's a level of embarrassment and discomfort.
Mr. Ellis says field manuals and training guides have been updated and warns cultural problems may be worse than the report reveals, acknowledging some expeditioners may be hesitant to speak up.
You have to have the cracks to let the light in, and I think this lets the light in and gives us the real authority to actually make change in the organisation.
Tributes are being paid to the American rapper Coolio, who has died aged 59. He was best known for his award-winning song Gangsta's Paradise, which topped charts around the world. His manager says he was found unresponsive on the bathroom floor at a friend's house. The BBC's Mark Savage reports.
Despite the title, Gangsta's Paradise was not a glorification of the gangster lifestyle.
As I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I take a look at my life and realize there's nothing left.
Instead, it was a sober look at the way America let down young black men like Coolio, who'd become trapped in a cycle of violence as a teenager. The song appeared on the soundtrack to the Michelle Pfeiffer film Dangerous Minds, and it made Coolio a star, earning him a Grammy for Best Rap Song in 1996.
Lets me know that we've been doing something good, we did something right.
News of his death at the age of 59 has shocked fans and fellow musicians. "This is sad news," tweeted the rapper Ice Cube. "I witnessed firsthand this man's grind to the top of the industry." MC Hammer called Coolio one of the nicest dudes I've known. Michelle Pfeiffer said she was heartbroken by a life cut entirely too short. Coolio died on Wednesday night at a friend's apartment. No cause of death has been given, but his manager said paramedics believed it may have been cardiac arrest.
Finally tonight, have you heard of a butterboard? Well, you're about to. It is actually just as it sounds. You slather a whole lot of butter on a breadboard, add some fancy toppings, then everyone crowds around and digs in with a piece of bread. CNN's Jeannie Moose reports on a food trend that's literally spreading.
It's a dish for those who like to butter up their guests. Soften your butter while riding the crest of a culinary trend.
Have you heard of a butterboard? Have you heard of a butterboard?
Literally boards slathered with butter and who knows what sprinkled in.
Add tons of flaky salt, tons of lemon zest, a little bit of red pepper flakes, fresh figs, strawberries, and add in some roasted garlic. I drizzle just a little bit of honey over that chili oil.
Then everyone is supposed to dig in with their bread. The sharing part freaked out this skeptic. Looks like a board of germs and dust and a hair falling in it. But food influencer at Justine Snacks begs to differ.
I love it.
Her video whetted appetites, though she credits Joshua McFadden, who included the butterboard in his 2017 book. Now it belongs to everybody.
Y'all, this is to die for.
Or die from. One critic called it a disgusting pile of coronary. When this TikToker didn't exactly devour it, someone asked, "Why are you chewing it like it's a piece of gum?" Some are already moving on to the cream cheese board, topped with lox and capers, mopped up with a bagel. Already the butter board is starting to feel like an overloaded pizza with chunks of cured salami.
Apricot jam.
I happen to have these dried edible flowers.
Why just butter your bread when your bread can be butterboarded?
You guys, this is perfect served with a warm, crusty bread.
A warm, crusty bed is one garnish too many.
That looks disgusting. No, don't do that. And one person in that video buttered it and then added salt on top of the butter. Just make some hummus. Hummus is good and much healthier. That's it from us. No more butterboard stories next week, we promise. But a little bit of feedback before we go. Plenty of it still on transport. We have got one here. Can you find an official who can acknowledge the number of North Waikato people commuting regularly to Auckland CBD? Te Huia does not stop at Te Kōwhata. No, it doesn't. There is no viable public transport option. Don't underestimate the congestion at Te Kōwhata causes on the highway to Auckland. Yeah, it would be better if it did stop there, I agree. Last one. My bus drove right past me today, even though I was standing looking at the driver. That is a terrible way to start the day. Hopefully your weekend's slightly better. Enjoy it.
RNZ News headlines at 6:30. Kia ora tātou, I'm Evie Ashton. US officials say at least 10 people have died in Florida and the death toll is expected to rise as Hurricane Ian continues to strengthen. Ian is now moving inland towards North and South Carolina. A fourth mid-Canterbury farm has been confirmed to have Mycoplasma bovis, and the M. bovis program director says it's likely the cattle disease has spread to more farms. And despite a wet start to the school holidays, NIWA's principal scientist says the cool temperatures seen across much of the country won't last. Those are the headlines. Our next news and weather is at 7.
This week on Music 101, Rita Ora talks to me about uplifting women ahead of her performing at the Rugby World Cup. Jack White raves about his love for music ahead of his Christchurch show. Tom Scott talks bluntly about his new Avantdale Bowling Club album. And Leon Wadham, comedian, director and actor, is our guest on the mixtape. This Saturday with me, Charlotte Ryan, from 1 p.m. here on RNZ National.
Kia ora, Charlotte. And I'm Brian Crump, getting ready for another night on RNZ National. I had forgotten that the school holidays have just begun, but I'll be reminded of that soon, very soon, I'm sure, by my son. Because this is my final night on RNZ National, and I'm looking forward to keeping you company after the news at 7 with a Sonic Tonic dedicated to the past 17 years, because that's how long I've been hosting nights. I've got some of my favourite songs released in that period, 2005 to 2022, and some of my favourite sound bites. And our 7:07pm question, you're hearing it first here at 6:32, is what's your abiding memory of the past 17 years? Something you overcame? Something you cherish? Something somebody did? Could be anything, really. Text me on 2101. Join the fun after the news at 7. In this half hour, later on, we have an interview that's from 9 to noon that's been getting a few clicks on the website with a Kiwi entrepreneur, Dave Ferguson, who is the brains behind NIWA, which is a driverless delivery company based in California. So the good news is lots of delivery services these days, Uber, whatever else, Ola. And now NIWA, but NIWA's driverless, so if you're stuck in traffic, it's just the vehicle stuck in traffic, not the human anymore, which I suppose is progress. But first off, focus on politics. And tonight's focus, I think, is on the politics of inflation.
Now, the British pound has fallen to its lowest level ever against the US dollar. In early Asia trade, sterling...
Vladimir Putin has repeated his threats of nuclear war and announced plans to hold referendum in occupied territory.
So the US dollar goes up, New Zealand dollar goes down, and it's not just the New Zealand dollar, it's the Australian dollar, the pound, the euro, Japanese yen, you name it, everybody's suffering.
We all know our wallets have been battered by a trip to the supermarket. Today, it's official. The largest annual increase in food prices since July 2009.
It's a turbulent time, but how is New Zealand's economy holding up? And how are things shaping up as we look, hopefully, beyond the pandemic? The cost of living crisis is cutting deep. What are political parties promising to do, or not, to ease the financial pain for New Zealand households and businesses? Welcome to Focus on Politics. I'm Jane Patterson.
The global environment is enormously challenging at the moment. The effect of the war in Ukraine is significant in all of Europe. Obviously, Vladimir Putin's most recent announcements about conscription, things that have happened to the gas supply lines as well. And then you take a step further back, you've got China, where economic growth is really slowing, and the US-China relationship has its challenges as well, and then there are the ongoing impacts of COVID and supply chain. So they are choppy waters.
It's a daunting list for Finance Minister Grant Robertson, trying to balance short-term demands against longer-term needs. He cites positive economic indicators like record low unemployment, low public debt and economic growth, albeit restrained, as evidence the New Zealand economy is holding up well compared to many other countries. One weakness, he acknowledges, is severe labour shortages, not only constraining productivity, but named by the Reserve Bank as one of the factors driving inflation. Mr Robertson says closing the border during COVID was a hard but necessary decision, which has contributed to the current skills shortage. Investment in trades training and loosening immigration for skilled migrants is part of Labour's recovery plan.
We're making progress, but we had to turn the machine back on, and the machine has to warm up a bit. And also the whole world is looking for this kind of talent at the moment, and we've done our immigration reset, we've got the new accredited employer scheme going, but that's still the bit that I can see where there are real constraints on the economy.
Did you turn the tap off too hard and for too long on that labour supply in anticipation of the borders opening and the shortages we're now seeing?
I don't believe so. I think we did what was prudent for our COVID response, and we also took the time to do the immigration rebalance, because one of the things we've all wanted, and the previous national government started some of this work, is to move to an immigration system that's more about filling the gaps that we have rather than just volumes of people. And the immigration reset is about saying where there's a demonstrable skill need, you've looked for someone in New Zealand and you can't find them, we actually want to make it easier for you after those two steps to be able to bring someone in. So I think it was the right thing to do, but we are facing a situation where globally this is an issue. A small little anecdote, I was talking to the Australian infrastructure peak body about what they were doing, and they've been trying to find people to come and work in Australia, and they were in Ireland trying to recruit Irish workers, and they spoke to one of the labour hire companies in Ireland who said, well, look, we can't help you because we're in Australia trying to find workers to come and work in Ireland. This is what's happening, and it's really challenging.
However, National is honing its attack, continuing its accusations the Labour government is spending too much and taxing New Zealanders too much. Its latest focus is the proposed social insurance scheme. It's been in the works for a number of years, with both the Council of Trade Unions and Business New Zealand being part of the initial drive to set it up. Submissions have just closed, but what's being proposed? Our political reporter Annika Smith explains what's on the table at the moment.
This is part of a long-term strategy to make both workers and the economy more resilient to shocks and disruption, which we've obviously seen a lot of in the pandemic. The income insurance scheme is effectively broad brush insurance for workers who might, at the drop of a hat, find themselves made redundant or lose their job, unable to work because they become unwell. Now, under this scheme, if someone loses their job or becomes sick, they get 80% of their income for up to 7 months. So that's effectively a 7-month cushion or buffer for someone to retrain, rest and recover and find employment.
Is there a cap on that, like with ACC?
It is capped. It's up to salary cap of up to $130,000 a year. And if we break that down in terms of different scenarios, you might have 3 different people. Person A earning $880 a week. So in terms of the levies that they're paying out of their salaries, and that levy is about 2.77% split between employers and employees. So that person A pays $12.23 a week in levy.